Good morning and welcome to the 8th Annual United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and Global Human Rights Gathering, a UN General Assembly high-level opening week side event coinciding with the UN SDG Summit, as well as Climate Week NYC. In our 8th annual meeting, we're going to have a human rights approach and holistic action plan at the UN 2030 Agenda Halftime, a moral architecture of municipal and multilateral movements to leave no one behind and build back better together. We're looking at the Universal Declaration of Human Rights 75th anniversary and halfway for the UN SDGs. It's a high impact indigenous strategic stakeholders inclusive initiative and international shifts in solidarity to shape our collective world system. It's an honor to be able to have the amazing panel of global advocates and activists that are very dedicated to the important issues enshrined in the 17 global goals. Today, we'll be looking at the UN global goals on the ground at halftime: dignity, democracy, and diplomacy for our future, human rights and fundamental freedoms in Asia Pacific. What is so important about our conversation today is we'll actually, though, be looking at a region of the world that doesn't get enough attention when we think about where we are with the global goals, as we're really at the midpoint. We know we have 7 years left to achieve these important issues. And what we'll look at today is human rights and SDGs in Southeast Asia, the truth about the implementation of the SDGs in Laos, and unfortunately, the outside influence. We'll be looking at one model of development known as the Belt Road Initiative and looking at how it has wielded not an agenda that advances the 2030 agenda global goals, but actually in many ways actually moves away from those important aspirations of humanity. We'll begin with the president of the Alliance for Democracy in Laos. And it's an honor to welcome Brounthone Chanthalavong to share with us. It's great to reflect also that a year ago we were here together at the UN high-level opening week. And it was great to think about the memories we had lobbying and meeting with all of the diplomats, as well as the fellow civil society that are fully committed to achieving the 2030 agenda in their homelands, the same way that you are for the future of Laos. Brounthone, I hand it to you.
Thank you, Joshua. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Brounthone Chanthalavong Wiese. I am the president of the Alliance for Democracy in Laos. The Alliance for Democracy in Laos, ADL, is a worldwide network of human rights and democracy activists for Laos with headquarters in Germany. The government of the Laos PDR has accepted the Agenda 2030, but we see that there is no development in Laos to reach the SDG goals. On contrary, we see that the development in Laos is getting worse. As is well known, the Laos PDR is one-party dictatorship, which is becoming more and more dependent on its communist neighbors, Vietnam and China. My statement today is about the actual situation on the SDG 1, 2, 3, and 16 in the Laos PDR. I will show our presentation. SDG 1, no poverty. Officially, the government of Laos announces that it intends to abandon its status as one of the poorest countries in the world and become an emerging economy. The fact is, however, that a large part of the population is still considered to be very poor. Obviously, about 10% of population earns less than $1.90 US per day. However, our observations assume a significantly higher number. In our estimation, according to our observer, the true poverty rate is 80% above. On the rampant inflation and the economic disempowerment of the Laotian population by investors, mainly from China, contribute to this development. Special economic zones are created for Chinese investors, and land is generously bequeathed, which leads of land grab on an unprecedented scale in Laos. It is also striking that there has been no reliable information on the subject of unemployment since the corona pandemic. However, since the number of Laotians who are forced to work abroad has increased to 1 million, we can assume this is around 14% of the population. I will show the next one. SDG2, zero hunger. In the 2022 Global Hunger Index, LAPDR ranked 82nd out of 121 countries with an update of calculate 2022 GSI scores. With a GSI score of 19.2, LAPDR is in the moderate severity category. The fact is that a large number of large-scale plantations with monocultures of bananas or rubber have been established by Chinese investors. However, the food produced is unaffordable for the Lao population and is sold to China. Due to the loss of their areas in favor of the investors, the local population missing more and more cultivation area for their supply. In us and aside, it might be worth mentioning that most investors don't even pay taxes in Laos. The next one. SDG 3, good health and well-being. Unfortunately, since the last ADL report on this subject, nothing has changed for the better. On the contrary, as a reason to the underfunding of the healthcare system, many nurses have given up their professions because they receive little or no pay.
Geographical.
Now hospitals in Kambane and Chanthalavong provinces have announced they are insolvent.
Inequality.
The reasons for this are primarily to be found in the extreme corruption in the country. While the rest of the world families are supported with child benefits or other benefits, people in Laos have to 3 million sheep pay for every bird, according to our activists.
Inequality,
The next one.
geographical.
SDG 16, peace and justice and strong institutions. Although the Constitution guarantees freedom of speech, freedom of the media, freedom of assembly, and freedom of association in Article 43, this does not exist in reality. The Laotian authorities are cracking down on human rights activists. Anyone who peacefully protests for freedom and against the condition in Laos will be punished with imprisonment for up to 20 years plus a fine for their terrorism or defamation. You see the next one. Excuse me. You see case of Miss Moi or Moi Hương Senyapoli, the case of Mr. Udon Thaler, the case of Mr. Ot Sanyavong, the case of Mr. Sombat Sompon, the case of 3 Lao bloggers, the case of Mr. Puvong Sanyase, the case of Mr. Bunsuan Kitchiao, and the case of Mr. Puton Pilachan, and more. A disturbing development in the current crackdown on the internet and social media since decree number 327 in 2014, and other has been to act. This is hardly impossible to criticize the government or the party in Laos. The constitution in Laos are against the principle and spirit of the Convention on Political Rights, according to the Laos Constitution in Article 3. The citizens of Laos barely dare to stand up for their rights. As a result, the rule of law of the country is in danger. Decree number 288 in 2017 prevent the work of NGOs in Laos. The government of Laos claims that more NGOs work today than ever before. But the fact is that neither human rights organizations nor political NGOs are allowed in Laos. Worse, regime critics are treated like criminals. Our recommendation. First, Laos needs depth reform throughout the political system. The lack of democratic controls and the resulting lack of transparency lead to an increasingly drastic deterioration of the situation for the population. Development aid projects must be conditioned, coordinated through consistent regional planning. However, this can only be successful if it is open and transparent for the population. Likewise, corruption control must be public. The participation of the population in the awarding of projects seem unavoidable because only to meaningful use these guarantees. Second, a profound democratization of the institution, a publication of all the funds used and the contracts with foreign investors will reduce the misuse and corruption. Sustainable environmental protection with the help of recognized NGOs such as Greenpeace enabled another. International and public controls are necessary to make a sustainable food and agricultural policy. The forestation that endanger the ecosystem and thus the nutrition of the population had to stop immediately. Projects without the development of the local population are without benefit and sustainability. Here is requires an immediately reversal. First, in general, Laos lacks sustainable regional planning for republic institutions. Sensible regional planning under the assistance of international institutions under the supervision of the WHO would improve the long-term problem of general medical care. Fourth, Laos needs a constitutional reform in which the three powers of the judiciary, the executive and the legislature are clearly separated from each other and independent. Only then will it be possible to guarantee the rule of law for the citizens of Laos. A democratization process must also be initiated to monitor this independence. This does not mean a revolution. This is the transition to a new system that forces on political forces to make it more for the people of Laos for sustainable development. In introduction of the new law to improve the situation bring little benefit so far as long as the existing laws are carried out only arbitrarily. With the proportionality of the punishment in prisons must penetrate, improve. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brounthone, for that comprehensive review of initially the economic, social, and cultural rights, but also the civil and political rights, specifically, of course, the human rights defenders and environmental earth rights protectors who have been criminalized and even murdered just for actually doing the work to help the world achieve the 17 global goals. And instead of supporting and strategizing how to assist, we see, unfortunately, a handful of governments that are actively denying the most fundamental dignity of people. And we really can see that Laos was on the correct path. We can see that Sombath Somphone had really the SDGs before the SDGs were even drafted, that what he was aiming to do was popularize the traditional farming methods, looking to make sure that there was no poverty and zero hunger, as you said, but then also doing quality education, sharing that through video with the youth of Laos so that they can know those skills and pass them on to future generations. And then, of course, the alarming trend that you highlighted of human rights activists who have been trained and gone to Bangkok to participate in the work of the regional Asia-Pacific Sustainable Development Forum and then face repercussions upon their return. So thank you so much. I'll now hand it over to our colleague who's even closer to the ground of the action. Rodney, can you share with us a bit the important issues of the global goals inside Laos and how ADL has been working to advance these important 17 Sustainable Development Goals?
Sacksady. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Peng, Sacksady, President of the Alliance for Democracy in Laos, Chapter Australia. Welcome on to our side event, Human Rights and SDG in Asia. I will be covering SDG 10, Reduce Inequality, SDG 17, Partnership for the Goals, but I'll be covering mostly the influence from outside. I call it the puppet show of the dominant powers of Vietnam, China, and Russia in Laopedia, and how they come about, why the implementation of the SDG is not working with the outside influence. First of all, what has Pathet Lao brought into Laos after the seizure of power from the Royal Lao government in the 2nd of December 1975? Kaisan Phomvihan, the leader of the Indochina Communist Party movement under Ho Chi Minh, and the leader of the Lao People's Revolutionary Party with the Vietnamese name of Nguyen Kai Song, became the first leader in the Laopedia. What happened to the Red Prince Chanthalavong, you might ask? The leader of the Lao People's Party, who joined the Indochina Communist Party in the 1950s, had to abdicate his power to Kaisan Phomvihan, just like the king of Laos, King Savang Vattana, had to abdicate his kingdom to the Pathet Lao Communist government in 1976. So traditionally, Vietnam has been the dominant power in Laos in both the civil services and political governance. In Laos since the Vietnamese-Lao Treaty of Friendship of July 18, 1977, secured the status of permanent control over Laotian power apparatus. This has made it much easier for the Vietnamese citizen to enter to the country and obtain Lao citizens. Generous land concessions were given to the Vietnamese, and even illegal over-exploitation of the rainforest in Laos was promoted. This over-exploitation was made possible by rampant corruption in Laos. Until recently, Vietnam was also preferred for the development of raw material deposit. All in all, there was a massive exploitation of Lao resources by Vietnam. As a result, the Laotians were disadvantaged compared to the Vietnamese in their own country. And the country is still a developing country with great poverty, even after 48 years of communist rule since 1975. Apart from the overexploitation of the rainforest, natural resources in Laos, the puppet of Lao government is pushing for the change of the Lao language and the Lao culture by introducing Vietnamese schools, as well as the creation of the Ho Chi Minh Memorial all over the country. Vietnam has been the real deal for close ties relationship between the two countries for many years past, until the end of the Sino-Vietnamese conflict from 1979 to 1991 that China moved into Laos. After the conflict ended, China began to push for the bilateral relationship with Laopedia, and subsequently pushed Vietnam aside for major project deals for China had plenty of money to invest. The Chinese business deals in mega projects in the country boosted nothing in the accountability and action for the Lao people and the country in terms of economic development and sustainability, like the dams project, to become the battery for Asia. The special economic zones deals for as long as 99 years concession lease deals. And the mining projects to develop to all existing mines of up to a total of 570 mines in all 18 provinces in Laos. The ever-increasing influence is viewed with suspicion by some ASEAN countries and by others in fear of Laos to fall into the debt trap diplomacy of China and the allies of the President Xi Jinping for his desire to become the president for life, president for everyone, and president for everywhere. Is now affiliated with the Lao government. The Chinese city or Chinatown are being built all over the country, including the ones in Bogel province, where 200,000 Chinese are now settled and administered by the Chinese authorities and police force, preventing the Lao authorities and police to get access to the area. Similarly, in the capital city in Vientiane, there are some 10,000 Chinese living in these Chinatowns. Considering the Laos has 7.2 million inhabitants, in comparison with 1.4 or 1.5 billion in China, can Laos defend itself against China not to become one of China autonomous region, like what happened to Tibet? The most critical issue is for the Lao government to allow Zhao Wei to build the casinos in many areas of the special economic zone in the country, where we all know Zhao Wei to be the head of the transnational criminal organization, which was sanctioned on the 30th of January 2018 by the US Department of Treasury for criminal network engages in an array of horrendous illicit activities, including human trafficking and child prostitution, drug trafficking, and wildlife trafficking. China's influence is growing militarily, with military base to control Southeast Asia. And we all know what that means. That is part of the strategic plan for war against the US and its allies. Like Vietnamese, China is pushing Laos to become dependent on China in all aspects of development, including language and culture, as well as economic, social, and political development, for the exact same reason that those with the Chinese background and language will have the preferred status for jobs and opportunities. Both countries have now launched military operations together. Now we come to talk to Russia. Russia has been involved with good relations with Laos since the Soviet Union in power, and the recent Russian-Lao military campaign in 2019. Russia and Laos have launched military exercises together, including the arms trade. Moscow and Vientiane are looking to expand military cooperation, particularly in the arms trade. But what Russia could supply arms to Laos largely belong to the Reconnaissance era vehicles, machine guns, fighter jets, and tanks. Laopedia is making a collection of antique weapons, maybe. With the Russian President Vladimir Putin, with his military operation, which began on the 22nd February 2022 in crisis in Ukraine, the burden extends to the military of Laos PDR to reach out and help Russia by sending troops to help fight in Ukraine with all sort of promises for those poor and vulnerable Laos citizens in the hope that they will be well supported and well looked after for their services, ended up in disarray and despair, for some of them cannot even afford to get back home. From desperate conditions they have encountered in the battlefield. There was a case of one Laos soldier who reported to his wife to say that he was housed in the middle of nowhere, in the forest, far away from any civilization, and trying to escape to go back home. Thank you, Joshua.
Thank you, Rodney Peng, for sharing with us the important aspects of how Laos, while it's aiming and aspiring to be a democracy upholding SDG 16 for peace, justice, and strong institutions, has to battle against not only the colonizing force of the current Lao one-party system, but also China right above that's exerting influence through commerce as well as culture. And then, of course, one of the biggest issues here at UNGA 78 is, of course, the Russia war, which had started and continues on. And of course, Zelensky is actually appearing here this week, arriving to many to point out, of course, that you can't have any of these SDGs, you can't have any development if an authoritarian regime invades a neighboring country. And of course, that's really the main challenge. What Putin has done with his actions has actually threatened the UN Charter and its creation and what it stands for, to end the scourge of war. So this is what we have to see as we're brewing up what is possible and going forward. So we thank you so much. We know Zelensky is here to counter that, and we can see really a call to action for all people who care about human rights, democracy, and fundamental freedoms. We even saw that at the exciting mayoral meetings with United Cities and local governments, where mayors of Lithuania stood together to say we can't have any of this conversation about development if we do not have democracy and freedom for basic people. So thank you, Peng. I'll now hand it over to Marcus.
Yes, good morning to New York and Sacksady to the people in Laos. I would share with you some information about several SDGs. And one moment, I have a presentation for you. Yes, I hope it works. Yeah, no, it works. My presentation is on the SDGs number 4, 5, 8, 9, and 12. It depends from each other. It's a summary of the ADL report on the SDGs in Laos. And it should be a report on equal opportunities and fair conditions in Laos, how we can handle it and how we can do it. At first, we will speak on SDG number 4, quality education. Education, the Laos People's Democratic Republic 2023. As usual, according to the flower fake report from the Ministry of Education and Sports of the so-called Education and Sports Sector Development Plan, ESSDP 2021 to 25, which states that Lao PDR's education and sports sector development plan at the same time. It's to develop education system, to develop human resources with knowledge, skills, moral and right values, love of the country, to be a quality workforce that can meet the demands of the growing and sustainable economy, to be ready to cooperate and compete with countries in the region. The Alliance for Democracy in Laos, based in Germany and led by the president, Dr. Brounthone, Chanthalavong, Wiese, together with its members all around the globe, hurriedly protests against the government of the Lao PDR, led by President Thonglik Sisulit, together with Professor Dr. Put Simawon, Minister of Education and Sports, in providing fake documents to cover up corruption and bribery, in this case, involving education in the country with the main source of the country's prosperity. Only 70% of the children attend school in rural areas compared to 84 in the urban population. The low enrollment rate in rural areas is largely due to poor road access. Many children live isolated, mountainous areas. As a result, traveling to the nearest schools is an almost impossible endeavor. Furthermore, parents in the rural populations are typically low-income earners who can hardly afford the costs of education. They prefer to have their children work and earn income to the family. Another issue is a disproportionate oversupply of Laotian and international teachers in urban areas, which leave many rural areas with a few teachers. Many teachers got no pay from the government because the money is lost by the corruption. We fear that about 9,000 teachers, that's a lot for the small country, has quit their jobs and has to move to another one because it is not possible for them to make it better. That's a sad story. And now we came to another one, gender equality. Gender-based enrollment disparity. Laos education system has a clear issue regarding gender equality, equity. There's a higher number of enrolled male children compared to female children. The enrollment rates of the primary education level for boys and girls is 75% and 71% respectively. As the secondary level, the gap is slightly with 36% for boys and 31% for girls. This disparity is mainly due to the old-fashioned values that many Laotian families hold. Several families expect girls to shoulder the burden of caretaking and household chores. Hence, female education is not prioritized. That's a sad issue. And in addition to these problems, embedded in society, a growing problem is that of forced prostitution and forced marriage. We have researched how this is done. On the internet, especially in China, girls from Laos are presented and offered for sale. Many of these girls are only 13 or 14 years old. The girls are promised gifts such as a new mobile phone and are kidnapped by dubious businessmen. Apparently, girls from the Lao Hmong ethnic groups are most popular with these criminals. The children's family are completely unsuspecting about the problem, and the authorities in Laos do not take care of this problem. So these young girls are on their own with their problems. Corruption. Corruption is the most problem in Laos, and corruption is present in almost all cases of land grabbing, and this is the problem of the underdeveloped development in economy in Laos. In most of the land grab crimes, money goes to corrupt officials so they can get grant land concessions to foreign companies and initiate forced evictions. Anyone who protests against the land grab is immediately arrested or threatened by members of the Lao authorities. Prime Minister Mr. Peng has also criticized land grabs and corruption of the country. Such criticism has certain tradition when a new prime minister takes into office. In the past, committees were formed to combat abuses, but unfortunately, these committees were filled with exactly those who were accused of corruption. This time, a new emergency number linked to the parliament has been added to the already existing emergency number for land grabbing victims set up at the Prime Minister's office. But unfortunately, when you called one of these numbers, nobody answers. And if someone can still be reached, the calls for help are often not taken seriously. Land grabbing in Laos is causing increasingly poverty. Most of the projects that are being done in the land grabbing areas hardly create any jobs for Laotians. Foreign investors usually bring the workers from their home country with them. Thus, the government's consists of the development for the country thought these projects is refuted. And mining in Laos has increased in recent years due to the lack of sustainable development in modern economy sectors that benefit the population, and due to the growing state deficit of the fall of the currency, the government of Laos believes it can compensate for everything by awarding mining concessions to overstates, especially China. We have repeatedly reported that the environmental standards applicable in Laos are not being observed. More and more rivers are being poisoned with mercury and other chemicals, resulting in fish kills and poisonous pastures of livestock by the mines. And Laos currently has only 21,716 kilometers, these are 13,494 miles of pavement, of which 9,673.5 kilometers, this is 6,010 miles, are paved, and 12,042 kilometers, this is 7,482 miles, are unpaved. The ADL repeatedly received reports from members in Laos that funds that were planned for the construction of road has been misappointed for other projects. During the monsoon season, when the rain falls from May to October, these paths became impassable. Vehicles are not longer coming up the mountains, slipping down the step slopes, or sticking up the axles in the mud. The remaining trucks sometimes block the road for days until they are excavated, with a hoe and shovel, and the sun has dried the lane. Boats are rushing to torrents after heavy rain and can no longer be crossed. The floods are also tipping over a bus. During the rainy season, for almost half a year, farmers have difficulty getting to the next market or administrative center. The economy is almost paralyzed. Children cannot go to school. Women who would rather release in the hospital must give birth to their child at home and take the risk of losing the life of children. The domestic market in Laos is increasingly flooded with products from China and Vietnam. Local products are mainly presented on the agricultural sector. Mega projects and special economy zones, especially for investors from China, did not provide any benefit for the population. These mega projects, the local residents are forcibly relocated and replaced by settlers from China. The job created by the mega projects are mostly only for the new settlers from China. We have assumed that about, you are sitting, 45% of the land area in Laos belongs to foreign investors. This is land that the Laotians are not longer allowed to use. The land that it is offered to the Laotian as compensation is mostly of inferior quality. The population is finding it increasingly difficult to manufacture their own products and to enjoy their own economy and independence. Oops. One moment. That was wrong. But we don't want to speak only on problems, we will speak on solutions. The preference of Chinese and Vietnamese language over all foreign languages must be ceased. At most, the exchange and assimilation of the Lao culture by the Vietnamese culture. There's also an urgent need to stop corruption in the education system. The state must ensure that teachers are adequately paid right from the start. Gender equality is still a task for society as a whole. In order to guarantee equality, Laos need a democratic process and an associated public discussion. Both are currently prohibited in Laos. Next, large-scale projects based on the Soviet model are only beneficial to a limited extent. For this reason, local companies must be promoted with local projects, especially in the small business center. Only then can a healthy middle class develop in Laos and thus more prosperity for everyone. In projects for all foreign investors, it must be guaranteed that all workers that are needed to come from Laos, with a few expectations, for an example, high specialized skilled workers who cannot found in the domestic labor market. Okay. Infrastructure projects must also serve the common good and not major investors. As in the case of the railway construction, land concessions in return for infrastructure projects have only resulted in further depreciation of Laos and not a better economy. A comprehensive regional planning is needed. The United Nations can help by taking the construction projects into its own hands as long as the corruption in the country is not under control. It would also be worth considering if cannot privatize a part of the streets to relieve the public offers. Business representatives tend to have a greater interest in good transport links. And the last one, the forced relocations in Laos must stop immediately, just like the generous land concessions to foreign investors, which do not provide any benefit to the population. I repeat it, you know. Instead, one should promote organic agriculture and develop the infrastructure in the rural areas. This results in a much longer term and much more sustainable benefit for the people in Laos than the large-scale projects of the foreign investors. I hope this was a lot, and this is my contribution. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Marcus, for that overview. And I think one of the most salient strategies that you shared, which was so crucial, was actually the role of women and looking at SDG 5, gender inequality, because you're really seeing Laos deny half of their citizenry a chance to have a compelling contribution to what matters most. And we can see, of course, how that patriarchal system has only denied many young women the chance to change the country, to be a place that represents the culture and the values of what matters most. Also appreciated really the photo that's behind you, but also the one you concluded with the monks, because in a way that also shows a model of distribution, a mental development where people are centered and are focused on what matters most to them, where the cultural values of the people then frames the public policy and decides the direction going forward. So all of that is extremely valuable, and look forward to continue this conversation so that when the world does look at the UN General Assembly, and today, of course, is a day when the heads of state begin their speeches and share their vision, it is truly tragic that Laos and other countries are not able to have the view of the people. And one thing I would conclude before I hand it over to my next speaker is actually the point that the extreme inequality and the extreme poverty, that is the most crucial question. And it's that grinding poverty that we must address. And yesterday, the governor of Hawaii was here, and he was talking about that we really do have to understand that if we're gonna ever achieve the UN global goals, we have to address that issue and make sure that people are able to get a quality education. As you went back to that slide that Brounthone had talked about, to reiterate, education is essential. Then with that education, allowing youth to engage in creating the future that they desire. And of course, we only have 2,660 days until the end of the UN 2030 agenda. So it's a countdown. And I think what you've described shows the solutions of how we can move forward. We know we're taking up a decent amount of time, but we'll go into our two final speakers. I'll hand it over now to our colleague, Christian Chantha. Please share.
Thank you, Professor Cooper. Hi there, everyone. And ladies and gentlemen, I am Bounhom Chantha, President of Alliance for Democracy in Laos, in French chapter. Sorry. And my presentation today is about SDG 15 and SDG 16, two worrying and closely related problems in Laos PDR. I mean, land grab and corruption. You know, corruption and land grab go hand to hand in Laos. In most land grab crime, money goes to the corrupt official. So their foreign company can grant land concession and initiate eviction. Anyone who protests against the land grab is immediately arrested and threatened by the member of the Lao authority. The Laotian government, you know, want to turn land into capital, and everyone knows more and more land is now owned by foreign investors. That Marcus has mentioned earlier, about 55% of land, most of it from Vietnam and China. In the capital city of Myanmar, we stand up for our right to resident property that have been taken by the local people, by the government. It has confiscated property from people in several provinces across the country and leased it to foreign investors for up to 99 years, regardless of population. Now, the government has created a new land law. The people have to pay more fee for their land title certificate. The problem is that the fee is more than the people can pay, you know. its village and town has a different fee, there is no national regulation on how much people have to pay to the authority. Land grabbing in Laos is leading to increasing poverty. Most of the projects carried out in the land grab areas hardly create any job for Laos. Foreign investors usually bring the workers from their home country with them. This refutes the government thesis that the country is developing as a result of this project. We fear, Professor Cooper, that these reported cases are just the tip of the iceberg, and that the impact is far worse than anyone can imagine. According to some experts, the reason for the massive increase in land grab may be that the country is on the verge of bankruptcy and is trying to save itself. But at some point, there will no longer be a country that can be sold and where the local population can still live humanly. But the issues in the ADL human rights report from the beginning of 2023 are still an issue in Laos and neighboring countries. Land degradation and biodiversity loss remain a recurrent problem in Laos, with the Laotian population on the constant stretch and finding it difficult to hold on to their land. And between 2000 and 2018, 1 million hectares of land were seized. The population was forced to move in favor of mining and industrial plantation, for example, bananas, EVA, etc., etc. The government used its political power to push through projects. For example, the Sanyaburi Dam alone has limited access to land for 200,000 people with equivalent compensation from the rivers. Another problem, between 2012 and 2021, 7 cascading dams will be built in the Nam U River by the Chinese company which operate them for 29 years before they become the property of the Laos state. The seizure of land in this area displaced 134 families, including 9,748 people who were relocated to the village of Huailu at the Huapan province. Faced with the Chinese money, Laotian founders have no means of fighting back, The state, whose often corrupt officials, according to our members inside the country, are not even able to protect them. Towns like Luang Prabang, Udom Sai, and Luang Nam Tha are in Chinese hands for area, banana, and vegetable plantation, the produce of which is exported to China. In Bokeh as well, several hectares of banana plantation using pesticides are posing a public health problem, According to Radio Free Asia, the contraction of the road linking That Luang, the Grand Stupa, to Don Mae Khe village, a suburb of Vientiane, which was completed in February 2023, affected 21 villages in 2 districts of Vientiane, Saiseta and Saitani, seizing 300 hectares of land. And again, once again, the Laotians are being silenced in the face of the project. This road will be built by the joint ventures between the Laotian company and the Chinese firm Norinco. Another project to create a new town around Vang Bien will encompass 7,000 hectares of land granted to Chinese investors with hotel, restaurant, and casino infrastructure to promote so-called tourism from China, estimated at 9 million people a year, according to Radio VOA, broadcast on 26 July 2023. According to the same source, the government will grant 537,000 hectares to Chinese companies on two sides of the Lao-China railway line. There will be agriculture for exportation, mining. The provinces affected are Luang Nam Tha, Udom Sai, Luang Prabang, and Vientiane. The land grabbing is taking place, with a frantic pace. Very recently, in July, Radio Free Asia mentioned 44,000 hectares conceded to paper Lao holding company in order to plant paper tree in the district of Sepon, province of Samanake. In addition, there will be an extension to neighboring provinces with a required surface area assessed at 14,000 hectares. Our member in the country confirmed this information. And in some area, there is a lack of cultivatable soil for the population. In Udom Sai province, mining destroyed farmers' crop and poisoning the cattle that grazed the grass in the field because of the use of chemical products extracting mineral, said our member in the country last July. The Lao government doesn't care, Ongoing projects such as the Thad Luang Basin was already displacing 55,000 people, and those Mahanatisi Pandon in the south, Champasak province, affected 8 villages, and with an area of 10,000 hectares. Is terrible. 17 years have passed when the Lao decided to put natural resources in capital to develop its economy, but the result in terms of profit to the Lao people is not up to its expectation. And now, the corruption. Although the People's Republic of Laos has improved its ranking in the corruption index, currently 128 out of 180 countries, the third corrupted country in the Asian bloc. Overall, corruption is not improved over the last 5 years. Transparency International report a slight improvement, but this should be taken with a pinch of salt, Laos is still a one-party dictatorship, and there is virtually no independent reporting. The reason for the persistently poor situation in the country are quite complex. In theory, the Government Inspection and Anti-Corruption Committee, established in June 2011, has the same power as a government ministry and is responsible for exposing corruption in all government ministries, including the Ministry of Public Security. On occasion, the authority arrested low-ranking officials for corruption and administratively punished them. Report of criminal cases brought to court were scarce. The government-controlled press rarely reported cases of official corruption. In 2018, over $1 trillion kip, about 44.8 million US dollars were lost on development projects due to violation of law and financial discipline by government agencies and the private sector. One reason the Lao government has been ineffective in curbing corruption is its inability to influence the action of provincial government. After the passage of the anti-corruption law, great efforts were made to educate provincial officials. Although the Lao state is highly centralized in theory, the central government has traditionally been weak compared to the provinces. Most of the revenue is collected by the provincial government, which only provide part of their revenue to support the national government in Vientiane. Obviously, it does not give the Lao government much leverage over provincial governors. The revenue structure made it difficult to implement national policy and allowed provinces to obstruct national initiative to promote transparency and prevent corruption. Ultimately, high officials has protected from criminal prosecution by regular transfers, and the people don't know it about nothing. Only minor officials or ordinary citizens are punished for corruption. International aid funds are also for victims to corruption, with the victim of the flood disaster of recent years receiving little or no state aid. Other development aid projects are also regularly victims of corruption. As a one-party communist state, the Lao People's Democratic Republic is inherently resistant to transparency and accountability. We, Alliance for Democracy in Laos, denounces and deplore the three horrible consequences: impoverished population, 2, special zone economy with tourist aim or target for human trafficking, and 3, precarious job that explain the permanent exodus to Thailand to look for work. The Alliance for Democracy in Laos condemn the cynicism of this government on its economic and social development plan and require the immediate stop of land grabbing, because now half of the land belongs to foreign investors, especially Chinese settlers, and all at the expense of the Lao people. We also demand from this government to respect its people. Human rights. Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing really the most central issue that matters most to everyone, which is corruption. Corruption kills the ideas, the initiatives, the new institutions that people are thriving to create to be able to achieve the global goals on the ground inside Laos. So corruption is absolutely at the core of what we must concentrate on. There's a really strong campaign through SDG 16 that's focusing on transparency now, and we'll continue moving to that. We'll have to then cut our final speaker a little short, hopefully, as we have many things going on here at the UN General Assembly. Our final speaker is Kambane. Please continue, and then
เปิ
we'll
ด
do
ไม
our
ค์เด้อ
best
ท่าน
to
กำบาน
wrap up.
ท่านกำบานเปิดไมค์เด้เปิดไมค์เด้อ
Sorry. Thank you, Joshua Cooper. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Kambane Anonthisen, the President of the Alliance for Democracy in Laos, chapter of Canada. Next, I'm going to talk about SDG number 7, about building the dam, the hydraulic aided dams project, and SDG number 13, deforestation and mining projects. First, hydroelectric dam project. The current problem in Laos is a lot of dams have been built according to the report. Now, there are 86 hydropower dams in operation in Laos, up to 100 dams by the year 2030. Laos government owns only 2 hydro power dams, such as Nam Ngum or Thalat Dam and Huaisahong Dam. The other dams belong to the foreign investors. Chinese government had already built 11 hydro power dams in operation on the upper reach of Mekong River in China. They make Mekong River dry below the dams on every summer of the year. The people of 4 countries, Laos, Thai, Cambodia, and Vietnam, living alongside the Mekong River, had hard time for fishing, growing vegetables, and doing other business. But why Mekong River Commission and the International River Commission and the UN Human Rights Council did not put pressure to Chinese government to stop making Mekong River dry because Chinese dams? Laos government is pursuing the self-stated goal of becoming the battery of Southeast Asia. However, Thailand, which is the main consumer, has announced that it does not want any additional electricity from Laos. So the sense of these projects is in question. On July 23rd, 2018, Sapien Senam Noi Dam collapsed in Attapur province. 10 villages were flooded. More than 13,000 villagers have been affected. Hundreds were missing and 71 dead, according to the report. The foreign aid paid to these flood victims inequally because most of the money was used for other projects and collected by the corrupt officials. The dams only benefit to foreign investors and to the Lao government official from corruption, not for the ordinary people. Second, deforestation project. Few years ago, international NGOs reported about illegal and logging in Laos. Some time ago, the English English Environment Assessment, or EIA, based in London, write a particularly revealing report about the rainforest in Laos is disappeared a lot. The independent experts fear that there will soon no more forest in Laos. Not only EIA, but also Global Witness has been investigated in recent years that Vietnamese companies are involved in the deforestation, which is concentrated in the east and south area of Laos. The Vietnamese companies are primarily responsible for overexploitation. Before 1975, Laos has 75% of forests, now about 20% only left. Third, the mining project. Historic records from the United States Geographical Survey, or USGS, Lao PDR has 208 identified mines in digging. The most commonly listed primary commodities in Lao mines are gold, lead, and copper. Lao has 4 project mines and 223 mines in production. At the time the data was entered into United States geographical records, the gold mining in operation are Phu Sepon, Phu Bir, Phu Kham, and Atapu gold mines. Laos is so rich in natural resources in the world, but the people are still poor, and Lao government has a lot of debts because the corruption. The toxic chemical waste from mining plants poison the fish, animals, and the human being. Recommendations: first, Lao government should stop building the dam. Second, Mekong River Commission, International River Commission, and the UN Human Rights Council should put pressure on Chinese government to stop making Mekong River dry, because 11 dams upper reach Mekong in China. Third, Lao government itself should be the investor for any mining project and stop corruption in order to reduce the debts and improve living condition of Lao citizens. Fourth, they must keep toxic chemical waste from mining plants in safe place. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Mr. Cooper.
Thank you very much, and really do bring up the important issue that's really at the heart of the SDGs, and what has been talked about a lot with the high impact initiatives is renewable energies. But what's important, of course, is we can't deny human rights, and point out how really one of those important aspects of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples is free, prior, and informed consent. When we see what's going on in Laos, in their quest to pursue to be the battery of Southeast Asia, they have ignored the will of the people on whose lands those dams would be built upon. And more importantly, we have not seen a direct benefit where these new dams are built, that then there's electricity for the people. So unfortunately, the directly impacted peoples do not have any of the benefits, and the exporting just shows a corporate agenda that really denies the citizens of Laos their most basic fundamental freedoms. So thank you all for sharing and bringing those forward. It's an honor to host the Alliance for Democracy at Laos at the 8th annual UN Sustainable Development Goals and Global Human Rights Gathering. It's quite crucial to see what is happening everywhere and to be able to appreciate the points that were being brought forth by the Alliance for Democracy in Laos. What was so strong, though, was really giving an update, or what we can actually say an honest assessment of what has happened so far in Laos, and more importantly, planting a seed for what is possible as we go forward in these final 7 years. We have 7 years, and people yesterday described that we have to change the impossible to I am possible, and that we have to really unite and ignite a movement together to be able to make sure that the rights of all are realized. And we look at the global goals on the 75th anniversary of the UDHR. It's a reiteration in many ways, as Brounthone began our conversation today, of those economic, social, and cultural rights, but also addressing the issues of globalization that we see so far in the 21st century, that we must concentrate on economic, social, cultural rights, on fair economy, really understanding our reciprocal relationship with our earth, and finally, focusing on those civil and political rights, those core aspects from self-determination all the way to functioning freedom that is exercised through a democracy, a dynamic democracy that allows for conversations among all people about what they desire and how they will create that future together. So I thank all of you today. I thank you very much for also highlighting how geopolitics, how a current war in the Ukraine with a senseless invasion by a neighboring nation really does challenge the UN Charter. But we see today, as I shared, that Zelensky is here at the UN General Assembly, pointing out that all these issues are interconnected. You can't have war and conflict and invasions. You can't have poverty. You can't have a lack of freedoms. All those are the ingredients for a world without a future. And we know now, of course, that while there's 6,600 days, 621 days left until the end of this agenda item, more importantly, we know we have even less time with the climate clock that I remember looking at with you, Brounthone and Marcos, last year at Union Square, that counts down until we'll replace irreversible harm. So we must take action for Laos, and we must love Laos the way that we love our larger earth, and understand we're on one island earth. And the Hokulea captain, the master navigator, Nainoa Thompson's actually in New York, and he was sharing how they've been traveling throughout Oceania. And in a way, he points out that the world is one canoe, one ba'a. And if we don't learn and think about it that way, we unfortunately will face the conditions and circumstances that many people in Laos face. And so if we can coordinate globally, we can make a difference. But I think the new way to think is that we must think locally about what matters most, as you have, about Laos, your homeland, and then act globally to make sure that the world reflects the values of your true culture. So thank you all very much for participating and being engaged at the 78th UN General Assembly high-level opening week, and look forward to connect with you later. Aloha.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
You're
Joshua.
welcome.
Happy
Bye.
staying in New York. Hope so. Hi.